After talking to everyone, still like the same attitude.
I feel great. Actually, with this guy, we were talking about culture. We were talking about socialism. We were talking about completely unrelated issues, and I like the guy. I like his views.
Yeah,
And it seems
Kimari,
like-
I love it. Yeah, same.
And it seems like we agreed on a lot of issues. So we're not even talking about.
Well, how do you feel about you feel the same way as before about, chickens and
Well, I'll
everything?
come home. I'll watch some more videos, and then I will let you know. How about that?
Cool.
I'll do a little more
We're
research.
here every 2 weeks.
Oh, every 2 weeks?
Yeah,
Really?
yeah.
Oh, I thought it's just once in a blue moon. Every 2 weeks?
Yeah.
Oh my God! Do you hassle these guys every 2 weeks?
We're trying to shut them down, yeah.
You're trying, but that's not nice.
Well,
That's not nice.
we're not.
This-
The
but this
point
is
is
somebody.
not to.
This is somebody's livelihood. I mean, come on, you cannot.
But what
just say-
about the chickens' lives in there?
Well, I'm more concerned
could
about
get anything
human
else.
livelihood.
All of the
Going on?
chickens who have ever
want
thousands
some?
of I'm good, thanks. Those are vegan, by the way. They are vegan. There's
Good.
no like gelatin or anything. I would eat one if I was in the mood, but
So I should read like small print. It's like, what are the ingredients? Seriously?
well, it's just if it has gelatin, yeah. I mean, it's like boiled down bones.
I
So
see. So you wouldn't need that either.
no. Like no corpses should go into my body, I think.
Okay.
But anyways,
Okay. I got some
guess
problem
yeah.
here.
Think about it. I was gonna ask, like, do you make videos? Do you have a YouTube? Like, what's?
No, mostly for me. I think I just.
Oh, you just
My crown
like a
came
hobby thing?
Yeah, pretty much.
That's cool.
I'm not a profit.
I'm sure this will give you some pretty good content.
No, I'm not making money off of it. I have my own successful business. I'm fine.
Wait, what were you saying?
I have my own successful business. So I think I just lost my crown. Just came
Oh,
off. Uh-oh.
damn.
Yeah.
Say,
Got to go. Attach it back.
no, I'll
that's
see you,
embarrassing.
though. But yeah, I mean, think about it, and you know
Okay.
the idea that chickens don't matter. Do you think that would have? Did you come up with that? It's learned, right?
What's that?
The idea that chickens, turkeys, pigs, cows, they're food animals, they don't matter in the same way as like dogs and cats. It's not something that you one day like decided for yourself. After getting to know chickens, getting to know, that's what we're taught. I was taught the same thing. And just,
Still here. You're still here?
Yes.
And you're
You
still
know more
not
chicken head.
vegan?
No. Well, I'm learning.
Yeah. So to continue our conversation, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So me and you can both admit and agree that Islam is worse than other religions
Yeah.
because of culture. And that's actually something that can be proven without using the excuse of socioeconomics. Because even if you look at predominantly rich Islamic countries such as Saudi Arabia and Qatar, for example, they have homosexuality illegal. Right?
Right.
And if I'm not mistaken, it's punishable by either imprisonment or even death. Right? And these
Yeah,
are predominantly
stoning.
rich. Exactly.
right.
These are rich countries.
Yep.
Very rich and wealthy
You're making
countries.
excellent
So
point,
that's an
yes.
actual cultural thing.
Uh-huh.
Here's why you cannot. Here's why the socioeconomics excuse, right? Quotations excuse.
Oh God,
Makes
this
sense
vehicle
when it
again.
comes to- When it, I know it's so fucking annoying, bro.
So let's step back a little bit, far away maybe from this stupid vehicle. Yeah, I like your point of view. So, but I really want to learn more about. I mean, you as a former Muslim, even though they say there isn't such a
hold
thing
on.
as a former Muslim.
Yeah, go ahead.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So even though they say there is no such a thing as a former Muslim, but I guess there is such a thing.
Yeah,
Because they
exactly.
will be after you. I mean,
They definitely will.
there's like a fatwa. It's like, what do you mean former Muslim?
Yeah, it's called a fatwa.
Yeah.
Yeah. 100%.
So you have kind of a fatwa hanging over your head.
That's
watch
just how
out.
it is, unfortunately. Right? I mean, take a look at what's
So tell me more about it, because I really want to know more about
Islam in particular?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, about the view of the left and why they are wrong. It's a really interesting point.
Because, so here's the thing, I'm not denying that I'm very left-leaning myself. However, unfortunately, you'll find a lot of left-leaning people who tend to be heavily ideologically driven, right?
Uh-huh.
So, for example, what we're promoting here is veganism.
Uh-huh.
We are trying to obviously shut this hellhole down. A lot of left-leaning people are unfortunately not vegan. But, to be fair, vegans usually tend to be more left-leaning, right? But a large majority of the left isn't accepting veganism for whatever reason, right? Selfishness is definitely on top of that list. So more often than not, you'll find that a lot of left-leaning people will say that veganism is classist, racist, ableist. It's anti-indigenous.
Oh, wait. So leftists are actually
Yes.
against your views? They're against vegans?
Yes, as far as
Oh my
I'm aware, a large majority.
Really?
Yes, as far
That's
as I'm
news to
aware.
me.
Yeah. So it's
Okay.
actually, I'd say 50-50. So 50% is a little bit more
Really?
open to it, to veganism, right? However, the other 50% are heavily ideologically driven, and they think that veganism, which is literally being kind to animals, they think that it's racist, classist, ableist.
That's so
right?
weird.
So
Okay.
let's look at the racist part first. They think it's racist because they see a lot of vegans and they'll focus on the white ones. They'll never focus on the likes of me, for example, who's black, and I think there's a likelihood that I could be indigenous as well. They'll never point the finger at the BIPOC vegans, right? They won't focus on me. They'll go straight to the white vegans, right? So if a non-vegan leftist
You
was
mean
walking,
white collar?
yeah, they'll
Okay.
focus on that white color because, oh, you know, white people have been oppressing minorities for such a long time, you know? So they'll focus
Okay.
on that in particular,
Okay.
right? So they won't come after people like me, for
Interesting,
example,
okay.
because I'm a BIPOC, right? And they're afraid that if they say something against me, that they can be labeled as racist, for example, right? So the reason why they think veganism is racist, right, or anti-indigenous or whatever the case may be is because, you know, we vegans will tend to target cultures that oppress animals. For example, like Eid al-Adha, which is a part of Islam, as I talked about Islam being very oppressive, we'll tend to target these cultures, right? And non-vegan leftists think that white people are the ones that are targeting these cultures, and when they see that white people are targeting the cultures, they'll think that, oh, they're being racist, they're being anti-indigenous, they're being anti-culture, they're being colonialist by targeting these cultures and pointing the finger at them and telling them to stop practicing their culture, but their culture is oppressing animals. You cannot use culture as an excuse when it comes to oppressing animals in that particular region. It's called an appeal to tradition fallacy, right? It also ties in with culture and all that. So appeal to culture, appeal to tradition fallacy, it's inherently fallacious because think about it this way. There are, again, as I said, cultures such as within Islam that are inherently oppressive.
So let's talk about that because you're kind of you go away from this issue about Islam, being oppressive. You went into digress. That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah, they're known as
so what
the.
about Islam?
What about Islam?
Islam, yes.
So what do you want to know in particular
Well,
when it comes to Islam?
why the liberals, why the leftists are wrong about Islam? What is their policy?
They're very ideologically driven, as I said, right? So their main goal is to protect the minorities, to protect the disadvantaged, to protect people like me, for example, to protect trans people, gay people. That's really their main goal.
Do you need protection?
Unfortunately, I'm sorry?
Do you need protection?
Do I need protection?
Yeah.
Well, right now, in this particular instance, no, I don't. Right. But I'm talking about, black people or indigenous people, trans people, gay people,
Yeah, but
whenever
go
they're
ahead,
in
I'm
a
sorry.
situation where, unfortunately, they get disadvantaged. That's what I'm talking about
I
in
got it.
particular. So they just want minorities. They just want social equality. They want something called equalitarianism.
And
they
they're
just
wrong.
want
And they're
equality.
wrong.
Well, don't worry. We'll get to that, right?
Okay.
So they want equality, right? They just want everything to be the same. So since that's their goal, sometimes they focus a little bit too much on that, right? To the point where that clouds their judgment. So they'll look at something such as Islam and they'll say, you're being Islamophobic. Because here's the thing, a large majority of Muslims tend to be minorities compared to Christians who tend to be white. So it's very easy for the left to point the finger at the Christians because they're white. Right? But they won't point the finger at the Muslims because if they point the finger at the Muslims, another thing that the left also cares about, right? Especially those who are like kind of in it for the social points, they care about looking good. They don't want to be called racist, ableist, classist, etc. So they obviously won't point the finger at Islam because they're also afraid of that. So I think it comes to two main factors as to why the left doesn't target Islam compared to Christianity, especially in this country, is because many people from Islam, right? Many Muslims, they tend to be minorities, right? So because
In America.
I'm sorry?
In America, not in the world. of course.
Worldwide, just a large majority of Muslims worldwide overall, they tend to be minority groups, right? They tend to be black, indigenous, people of color. That's the thing. So they don't want to target that because for two reasons. One, they don't want to be, classified as like racist, for example, or and Islamophobic. And another reason is they're very ideologically driven, right?
The
because
leftists.
right, exactly.
Right.
So sometimes they'll come across scenarios where they'll see somebody who's a minority who's doing something wrong and they won't target that minority because minorities can't do no wrong or whatnot. But what you're failing to understand is that not everybody from the left is like that. Not everybody from the left is ideologically driven where, you can't say that Islam is bad. It's not as bad as other religions, when that's actually false. We have proof that, unfortunately, that is the case. So it all comes down to ideology. They're very ideologically driven. Sometimes when they'll come across a scenario where they're being contradicted when it comes to their views, they'll just throw that out. They don't care, because why? They're just so fixated on this idea of social equality, and it just clouds their judgment, and that's just how it is. And that's just kind of how politics works. It's not just the left, the right does it as well. They can be very ideologically driven as well. So I care about the facts, right? That's really my main goal. And the fact of the matter is that when it comes to black communities, the reason why they're doing the things that they're doing is because of socioeconomic status, right? We've established, and me and you both agreed, that you can't use that towards Islam. You can't use and say that, the reason why they're doing the things that they do, all the oppression, is because of socioeconomic status. Because if you look at, again, the richest Islamic countries on the world, like Saudi Arabia and Qatar, they're rich. So obviously the socioeconomic status excuse there wouldn't work, because they're rich, but yet they still have very, very oppressive laws there. So that is a cultural thing.
Wahhabism.
Me and you can both agree on that. But the black community, that's not the case. It really is not. We have mountains of evidence to prove that black people are being disproportionately affected when it comes to education, when it comes to...
Look, then I have another question for you. Especially for a person who is not black American. I mean, in a way you are, because you were born over here, but it is the one who harkens back to Africa. How can you explain all these genocidal relationships between blacks in Africa, like Hutu versus Tutsi? I mean, Sudan, oh my God, that's a whole story. Northern Sudan versus Southern Sudan, the newest country in the United Nations and nations in the world. And how can you explain the poverty? I mean, nobody lives worse
colonization. It all comes down to that.
Seriously?
So here's the thing, right?
Okay, so again, there's somebody else's fault. Israel, here's an example, which is really close to Africa. It's almost in Africa. Sinai, cross Sinai, it is Africa. Israel, at the state of war, no resources. Only recently, finally, they discovered gas over there.
Okay.
Nothing. Just
after World War II, you're talking about? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
There was no Israel before World War II.
Oh, okay.
So, and yet, extremely successful country. Extremely cultured. And it was kind of colony. It was under Turkish rule for 400 years. It was under British rule at the turn of the 20th century. Then they got independence. And they became hugely successful. Why in the whole continent of Africa, and it pains me to say it, why in the whole continent of Africa, I could not point to a single country that ever succeeded. And the best example of that would be perhaps Liberia. I mean, look at Liberia.
Okay.
When the American slaves were freed, they were given the parcel of land in Africa. They call it Liberia, free. It was President Monroe who allowed that to happen. They called it their capital, Monrovia, after the U.S. president who allowed that to happen. Their flag is modeled after American flag, with just a single star. Their constitution was modeled after American Constitution as well.
Okay, I
and
see.
Yet, it's a total disaster. It's an abject failure. How can you explain that?
Okay, so when it comes to Israel, do you know how they managed to actually build themselves up after World War II? Or no?
Of course I know.
Okay.
Yes.
So it all really came down to culture.
It all came down to all of them as a group coming together, not fighting each other, but coming together, creating communities, kibbutzim, moshavim, building their economy, working really hard, making education as a top priority, science, things of that nature.
Okay.
And, well, they succeeded in the end. They could have failed. They could have easily failed.
Okay.
And they didn't. I mean, it was such an experiment that, under all other circumstances, would have doomed to failure. And again, here's another experiment in Africa with Liberia. Abject failure. I mean, juxtaposing the two, I mean, you can see, two different places and two completely different outcomes. So how can you explain not just Liberia, but the entire African continent? This misery
I'm gonna be 100% completely honest with you,
Yes,
because
please.
a lot of people from within the left, they'll usually tend to scribble the way around it, right? So all of my focus for me is towards veganism, right?
Okay.
I told you I'm still learning when
Okay.
it comes to left-wing politics, right? I'm still trying to do everything that I can to learn more about colonization and socioeconomic status and culture, just when it comes to the cultural side of left-wing politics. Not really economic policies. Well, that as well, you know, like socialism versus capitalism. I'm still learning all of that, you know what I mean?
Okay.
So I only got the basic fundamentals down, right? So again, I would say it all comes down really to colonization, especially British colonization in particular, that have came to Africa, and during World War II, as far as I'm aware, Africa was also being affected, right? There was Italy, I believe they came in and invaded Africa. So Africa has always been, like, take a look at slavery, for example, right? Like, how did that happen? You had colonizers who went in and enslaved black people from Africa. There was the Atlantic slave trade, for example, right? So there was all of this colonization. What that did is, throughout all of these centuries of all of these Yuki, later. Throughout all this history that was going on when it comes to colonization and how they were... Okay, can you agree that obviously in the past that black people have been disproportionately affected, like through slavery, for example, right?
No,
Like,
no.
So black people were never enslaved?
No. Of course they were slaves.
Okay.
But for some reason, you are limiting the time frame to several hundred years back.
Okay.
The human civilization is several thousand years old.
Yeah, I know.
Okay. So if you go through several thousand years of slavery, just a couple of hundred years ago, coming from Russia, USSR originally, well, guess what? The white peasants in Russia were nothing but slaves. They were bought, they were sold. They were slaves. It was only abolished in 1964.
Okay, well, we can't
Nothing
go back.
to do with skin color.
Okay.
You go back to, I don't know, let's say Roman Empire. I mean, who were the slaves? I mean, all the colors. Whoever is the winner, well, it was perfectly normal back then. You know, unfortunately, that was the case. But hey, how can you judge them from the moral power of the 21st century? That's how people lived back then. They would conquer a country. They will enslave everybody. Unfortunately, that's how it was back then.
Right, okay, but we can go back a couple of thousand years. And there was Christopher Columbus, for example, who did a lot of colonization, right? There was a lot of horrible...
But before Columbus, it was happening, yes.
Before Columbus?
Of course.
What, slavery?
Of course.
Yeah, so before that, and what that ended up happening is, throughout, as time kept on going on further and further and further, you know, all of this slavery, all of this, you know, chaos that was happening towards a particular group of people.
It was a chaos. It was the system. It wasn't chaos.
What do you mean it was a system?
Slavery was the system.
Slavery was the system.
It was the economic system of all the countries in the world, basically.
Yeah, but did that make it right, though?
No, of course
Obviously
not.
Didn't.
Of course not.
Right.
Obviously not.
Okay.
And again, judging from the 21st century morality and mindset, and legally, of course not. But here's another question. When, let's say you're right, even though I disagree with that, but let's say you're right, that it's a colonization that lasted for God knows how long in Africa, and it ended. And it ended many decades ago. How come is that none of the countries that got their freedom and were blessed with huge resources, I mean, Congo, for example, diamonds, I mean, Nigeria, oil, I mean, you name it, I mean, huge resources, yet the countries are completely impoverished. Completely.
Capitalism.
Yeah.
I mean,
capitalism is to blame. You mean market economy?
Not capitalism as the economic system in particular, because we can look at it something like social democracy, like we were talking about earlier.
But is capitalism, social democracy is
modern day capitalism. Like, where do you think all of this shit comes from? You know, unfortunately,
market economy.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, what's unfortunate?
Huh?
What's unfortunate? Unfortunately.
No, I'm saying like you know, like iPhones. You've probably heard of the child slave mineral mines thing that goes on, and then there's also Tesla as well, right? So they have these resources, and sometimes they don't know what to do with it. And they have these resources. It's an abundance of resources, like you said, when it comes to oil and mineral mines in Democratic Republic of Congo. They have these resources. I'm pretty sure they can probably do something with it. But then again, it all comes down to the idea of colonization. It all comes down to the idea of people coming in, fucking with their resources, and taking it from them.
Now it
Because-
belongs to Africans.
Huh?
For many decades, since
Okay.
1950s, since 1960s, all these resources belong to the citizens of Nigeria and Congo and Sudan and you name it, Mozambique and Angola. They are blessed with resources.
They were blessed with resources, okay.
And yet Namibia and they're dirt poor. Dirt poor. So, and your answer to that is capitalism.
These resources are being taken away
What are they taking?
because
They
of
belong-
profit.
they
They're being
belong
taken
to
away from
them.
profit, okay? So what do you think they're doing with these resources right now? They have these
I
resources.
can tell you what they're doing.
Okay.
So you have, speaking of culture, dictators in Nigeria, dictators in all these countries who become super duper rich billionaires, and people are just as empowered as they've ever been, and their own black leaders, black dictators.
Okay.
So I mean, it has nothing to do anymore with white oppressors from
okay,
Great
so
Britain or France.
What you're saying is that these resources that are in these countries, for example,
Yes,
in Africa,
yes.
they're being taken by the black leaders.
Oh,
Or by
absolutely.
the black leaders
Oh,
in those
absolutely.
countries.
That's exactly right.
But
Yes.
haven't you thought that also countries such as the US, for example, or just other European countries
Yeah.
can come in and take those resources?
What do you
Have
mean
you
come
heard
and
of what
take it?
happens like and within like British colonization? It comes to that conversation, like the monarchy, how they came in and took the resources all the way, dating all the way back to India, for example, and then
do you believe in such a thing as personal responsibility?
again, I do, and me and you
So-
have both established the fact that certain cultures are worse than others. But again, unfortunately, when there's wars that happen, there's
Between
colonizing.
who? Between Hutu and Tutsi killing 700,000 of their own brethren? I mean,
Who?
Tutsi versus Hutu, 700,000 dead.
Where's that
Children.
going on in?
Well, it happened several decades ago.
Okay,
So, I mean, what does that have to do with anything?
let's take.
It goes,
okay, let's take
it goes
a break.
back to culture, and
Okay,
for
and me and you
Africa,
agreed on that. Certain cultures,
and
though.
Africa, it goes even deeper.
Okay.
It goes to tribal culture.
Okay,
So my answer to the problems, if you want to know my opinion, my answer to the evils and the problems of what's happening in Africa, in the whole entirety of Africa, basically, Black Africa,
Okay.
because there's North is a little bit different, is this tribal culture,
Right.
tribal, basically hatred. I'm sorry to
so
say.
everything is culture. Everything. You would
Well,
have to put.
wouldn't
You would have to put all of that blame when it comes to that.
But you disagree with that, or did we come to an agreement that
Well,
basically
we did agree
yes?
with that. We
Okay.
agreed with that when it came to Islam in particular, especially
Only
because
Islam.
I came. Well, there can be also other cultures as well.
But
For
there's
example,
different cultures in Africa.
We can use. Yeah. Okay. So let's look at a culture.
It's
Okay, so let's look at a culture
not
that isn't being
homogeneous.
driven by socioeconomic status, and that would be somewhere within the southwestern part of Africa. I'm not entirely too sure. I remember watching a documentary about this, how there was a person, right, who had HIV and AIDS.
Mm-hmm.
He was literally just going around and molesting 12 and 13-year-olds from within the region for no reason, and
why
he
did
justified that by saying culture.
Yeah, how did he? How could he? Where was the police? Why was he incarcerated? Imagine that happening in the United States. It would have
Right.
not have happened, because we have the laws, so we have the culture. The law was created by culture. Who makes laws? We, the people.
Yeah, I know.
We have the government.
Mm-hmm.
We elect the government, and our model happens to be the most successful throughout human history. The most successful.
Yeah, but
That-
obviously not everybody, when that was going on, not everybody looked at that and thought that it was normal. A large majority of the people from within that village and region obviously thought that that was fucked up, right? So you can't just go out and say that, oh, everything in that region, like what was going on there, it all came down to culture and everybody was okay with it. A large majority of the people weren't okay with it. It took a while for the law enforcement to track him down, but I don't even know if they caught him. Again, I don't remember the whole story, but this is a true story.
In
I
Africa,
forgot where it
happening in
happened.
Africa.
Yeah, it happened in
That's
Africa.
okay.
I literally looked into it. You're just gonna have to search up Africa, like it
So-
starts with an H. That's all I know, right?
So do you go to college? I mean, you're
No, I
quite
don't.
articulate. So
I
I'm
don't.
kind of
I'm
impressed.
very articulate?
Yeah, I'm
Thank
very
you.
impressed how articulate you are.
What, compared to the others, for example, or what?
We really didn't talk about other issues other than
I see.
the
Is this
chick-
going on
the
YouTube
chicken.
or what?
We'll see.
We'll see. I hope it doesn't because I did not do the best when it came to this debate about culture,
Actually-
and I didn't. I didn't do the best. Again, I'm not too educated. If me and you can, if we go on a debate on veganism, good luck on that. I can tell you that because
You're pretty good. I mean, and it's not about being. It's not about being prepared for anything. It's just having the ability to express yourself and
Right.
having an open mind and sharing your ideas. And I must tell you that I'm quite impressed. I'll be honest with you.
so you're right leaning. Is it safe to say you're right leaning for the most part?